someone else who seems to have gone through a bit of a stylistic overhaul, certainly in the way he's presenting himself, is one Donald Trump. The messianic rebirth of the Donald after that assassination attempt on his life. Now, he was in Milwaukee last night making his acceptance speech for becoming the Republican candidate in the 2024 US presidential election. We all expected, of course, him to get that after I think every single state in America seemed to nominate Trump unilaterally. I'm not even sure there was a single vote against him. I don't know. But let's have a listen to some of the things he was saying. First of all, let's listen to him talking about mass deportations.
Republican platform promises to launch the largest deportation operation in the history of our country. Even larger than that of President Dwight D. Eisenhower from many years ago. You know, he was a moderate, but he believed very strongly in borders. He had the largest deportation operation we've ever had. Tonight, America, this is my vow. I will not let these killers and criminals into our country. I will keep our sons and daughters safe. As we bring security to our streets, we will help bring stability to the world.
Well, that was probably a little bit more of the Donald 1.0 talking there. That sort of rhetoric that we got used to Trump saying, talking very tough, frankly, on illegal migrants who have flooded into America in millions over their southern border. And a lot of problems in America we're seeing happen here as well. I mean, let's just look at what's been going on in Leeds. Houston, we have a problem. But earlier on in that acceptance speech, he did take on a very different tone, a sort of gentler, preachery type tone. It sort of felt like I was sitting in a cathedral and I was like half expecting someone to start wim-womming around incense or something. Let's have a listen to him talking about his assassination attempt.
When I heard a loud whizzing sound and felt something hit me really, really hard on my right ear, I said to myself, wow, what was that? It can only be a bullet, and moved my right hand to my ear, brought it down. My hand was covered with blood, just absolutely blood all over the place. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack, and in one movement proceeded to drop to the ground. Bullets were continuing to fly as very brave Secret Service agents rushed to the stage, and they really did. They rushed to the stage.
Well, I am pleased to say that we're now joined by Rick Gates, who's former deputy campaign manager for Donald Trump in 2016, part of the MAGA crowd. Rick, it's fantastic to have you on. My understanding was you were stuck on a plane for a while with all of these global IT outages, so I'm really thrilled that you've been able to join us. I was talking there about Donald Trump sort of almost having this messianic rebirth, and people in America are extremely, I think, sort of Hollywood, and when it comes to the way they look at politics and the way they elect their leaders, they love a good narrative. There tends to be a lot more religiosity in your politics than perhaps we stiff, upper-lipped Brits tend to have in our politics back at home. And Donald Trump, in many respects, I think, you know, both cynically but also understandably cashing in on this when it comes to the hour-and-a-half-long acceptance speech and the sort of narrative he's now giving to the American people.
Yeah, Alex, it's great to be with you. Look, I think Donald Trump is a changed man, but he's still the same man at the same time. And you saw that in his speech last night. There were two parts. The first part was very much about unity. It was about the emotional experience he had with the assassination attempt. But then as the speech moved on, he got back into rally mode and, jazzing up the bass, talking about his vision for America, where he would take the country over the next 4 years. And there is a stark difference between, obviously, he and the Democrats on where they would take the country. So I think, you know, unlike a situation in 2016 or even 2020, you didn't have that assassination attempt, which absolutely changed the dynamic of the convention, and it also changed Donald Trump as a person.
Now, do you think that this is going to hold? Because right now, it just looks to everybody watching around the world that it's a shoo-in for Donald Trump. this year, and that we all now expect a Trump presidency. That as a result, the conversation around him seems to have changed. People aren't talking about the lawfare anymore. They're being less sort of hateful in the remarks and judgmental in the remarks and observations they make about him, and sort of looking at him through this different light, which I think as human beings we do when someone's had a near-death experience. The narrative around this is extraordinary. It almost does seem not just sort of like this persecution on biblical levels leading up to this point, the trumped up, for want of a better phrase, Russia dossier, the lawfare, the sort of publications which painted him as an antichrist, the attempts on his life, which it only looks like the hand of God intervened to stop that man from dying. And it does seem to me that a lot has changed, but we also predict, I think, that Biden could well step down this weekend if we're to believe all the gossip emanating out of America. And I wonder how long this uptick in popularity for Trump will last. The reason I ask this is I remember back in the UK during COVID, when we learnt that Boris Johnson was very, very sick and was rushed to hospital and potentially his life was on the line, the sort of outpouring of emotion and goodwill towards that man publicly was enormous. You'd think he seemed invincible, and during this time of national crisis that we were in, having our leader, in a hospital bed, we were wondering how he was doing, if we were ever going to have him back. There was this huge sense of love and gratitude towards him. Yet it wasn't very long afterwards that his neck was on the line. He was chopped, axed from power, gone, and, sort of excommunicated from politics altogether. The public can be, I think, as a voting bloc, sociopathically fickle. How does Donald Trump now ride this and make sure he can bring that unity and maintain that huge uptick in support he's currently enjoying?
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, every day in politics is like an eternity, and voters have short memories. So while, this is the Republicans' party, and they were on display and they showed unity, and that was one of the biggest comments that came out of it. How do they carry that on? And they have to carry it on through the states. Look, Donald Trump had two goals last night in his speech. It was to, project that voice of unity, but that it was also to reach out beyond the party or the traditional mode of the party. It was to bring in those moderates and independents, bring in the young people, the blacks and the Latinos. And if he's successful in doing that, the language last night in most of the speech was very much geared toward that, and he should be able to do it. But if Donald Trump takes a path of going on retribution, lawfare, and other things like that, he's going to isolate and alienate those voters that he needs. Look, this election is going to come down to 6 states. That's all it is. And within those 6 states, it's going to come down largely to moderates and independents in where they vote. They are the kingmakers in the next election in the United States.
Would you say right now those moderates and independents are on the side of Trump? And also, has America learnt lessons after what's happened? Have elements of the left-wing media started to calm down their own rhetoric when it comes to the vilification of Donald Trump, and frankly some integrity in their reporting, because they were all part of this grand scheme to pretend that Joe Biden was compos mentis and capable of doing the job, something that was patently obvious he wasn't to anybody with eyes and ears?
Yeah, the liberal media has taken a stark look at how they've portrayed Donald Trump and the rhetoric that they've used, and now the backlash that it is having. If it wasn't for the Joe Biden situation and their own division within the party and their own crisis as they figure out whether he's going to stay or go, I think that rhetoric would still be very high on the Democratic side. If it wasn't for the distraction of what's going on, I think they would be out there blasting Donald Trump every day, because their biggest fear is that he will win again. They underestimated him in 2016. They won't make that mistake again.
Now, you're talking about Donald Trump needing to get those sort of floating voters in 6 key states by potentially taking this new strategic approach with being sort of more warm and cuddly, let's say, than what we're used to. But also, I guess he's got to still throw some red meat to his supporters and give them what they want as well. How is he going to do that? Is Donald Trump a man who sits there with a team and listens to strategy and adopts and adapts accordingly? Or is this a man sort of very much driven by his own gut, by his own emotion, and essentially exhibits his own authenticity?
Oh, there's no question it's the latter. I mean, he is the strategist in chief. He goes by his gut. He thinks most of his consultants and aides are wrong the majority of the time. Of course, he does listen to people, but the way he does that, he kind of shops ideas around to different people he talks to and gains their insights and opinions, but it doesn't mean that he necessarily goes with them. But he likes to kind of create an environment where there is friction to some extent, and that is everybody has different opinions. He wants to hear all those opinions, but at the end of the day, it's his decision. And I think what you're going to see moving forward is very much a lot of red meat, a lot of that same rally style event that he does. But I expect to see, and what you saw this week was a lot more of his family members being involved, his grandkids, first time one of his grandchildren stepped up on the stage. I think that projected a much softer Donald Trump. He humanized him. It made him look like he was a father, grandfather, which is what Americans want to see. If they carry that forward, I think that he'll do very well in those 6 battleground states as well as the rest of America.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Look, Rick, let's catch up again soon because we're fascinated by everything going on in your country and we really want the best for America, and let's hope that what happened to Donald Trump on Saturday might see a bit of a turning point in things across the pond. Russell, before we go to break, you know, it's interesting. One thing that strikes me, listening to the fact that Donald Trump, the way he manages everything in his own campaign, does listen, does have, you know, a group of people around him, pits them against each other, but ultimately is the decision maker when it comes to all of this. And then adding to that what Rick was saying about the liberal media perhaps having a lesson to learn. I've said this previously on other shows. All the things that were thrown at Trump to try and stop him have now blown up. So you had the liberal left-wing media attacking him, vilifying him, he's the Antichrist, he's dangerous, he's a dictator, and all the while really brushing under the carpet the truth of the situation with Joe Biden, when now so many people in America just don't trust them. So they can't hold Donald Trump to account. Secondly, you had all of this lawfare against him, perhaps rightly, perhaps wrongly, but it definitely looked strategic, deliberate and tactical. Now, this seems to have resulted now in the Supreme Court turning around and exonerating Donald Trump for when, in the future, for when he's president, and basically says you're infallible now, according to the that law of the land when you're in office. So that's kind of had a completely reverse effect. Now, this attempt on his life and that near-death experience has sort of turned him into this almost superhuman character.
Yeah, he's...
You mix that together with a man who almost sort of is not autocratic, but very sort of single-minded in the way he runs things, with what's now going to be less accountability or fewer people to hold him to account ever before. I mean, what are we going to end up with?
His opponents have really played him the wrong way. I mean, they've played into his hands almost. I think, you know, what Donald Trump is very, very good at is in his own way being very authentic, actually coming across as being very authentic, and almost being the non-politician. I mean, in his previous campaign, he talked about draining the swamp and so on, and you know, he didn't really do that. You know, politics in Washington, you know, was the same kind of, you know, dusty, sinister, secretive kind of, you know, morally corrupt thing after his tenure as it was before. But I think people probably trust his authenticity more than they trust the American mainstream media, for sure, particularly the likes of CNN and others. And I think he's still the underdog, even though he's way ahead in the polls. I mean, even in states like Ohio, all these swing states, he's going to smash this election. I mean, as I said earlier, I think it will be an absolute landslide, the like of which we haven't seen for decades. He's still seen as the people's president, and he's seen as the underdog and authentic.
What I would say is don't speak too soon, because we don't know what's going on with Biden. We don't know what sort of rabbit the Democrats might pull out of a hat, and it changes on a, you know, on a second when it comes to American politics. An exciting narrative it is too.